found each other's arms. For your love, all you are. I'd start a riot. I'd start a riot.
All right, everybody, happy hump day. Welcome to part 3 of This Is How You Take Care of Yourself. Hope you guys are digging these. If you are, please share them with me. I'm at @RickAlexander_ on Instagram and at LionHeartRadio. Again, I had a really, really rough year last year. I guess a moment, a lot of times of learning, of figuring out what I wanted and figuring out how to deal with ambition and how to deal with, different relationships and things that, and trying to find yourself in the world and all the normal existential bullshit we all sort of suffer with. But out of it, one of the things that I came up with was a bunch of rules about how to take care of myself. And I really tested them over the course of, 6 months or so to see if they really were like helping me and changing my life. And turns out they are. And so I hope that you guys are getting something from these as well. So number 3 is, this one might be a little interesting. It's called Change the World, Starting with Coffee. So, I had a mentor, and we'll call him Jack for the sake of this show. Once he explained to me that every morning he'd go buy coffee for the person that was behind him in line in the coffee shop. And so I listened. He told me like all these transformative things that had happened in his life due to this like seemingly pretty simple task. Apparently for novelty, he went to the bank like at the beginning of each month where he'd give him $50 and then he'd ask for 25 $2 bills in exchange. And that's literally how he would pay for this coffee every morning. And at least 5 days per week while buying coffee, he'd hand the cashier a $2 bill and ask that they would apply it to the bill of the person who came behind him in line. So super simple. I recognize in 2018, $2 does not get you far in Starbucks. But I think really it's like the novelty and the principle of it. I don't know what his coffee shop was. For me, I've been doing this with a little bit more than $2, but this was Jack's story. So, never waiting for impact. He'd just take his coffee and leave after he did it. And so knowing that he at least started the day off doing something good. And I listened as he'd recount the people that had chased him down, mostly out of curiosity to talk to him afterward. And he mentioned all the business deals that transpired from the interactions over the years. And that really got me. But the one thing he stressed is that he was it just made him feel good. Made him feel good to do something else for somebody else every day, regardless of what came for it. And I always thought damn, that's a good way to start your day. Just feeling good about just helping somebody else in the most simplest way possible. Just making somebody else's day right out of the gate. And the wild part is he had some really crazy business stories that had come out of it. He'd gained a lot of business from it. So as it turns out though, Jack wasn't mistaken in his thinking. I watched a TEDx talk by Michael Norton, and it was called How to Buy Happiness. And he recounts an experiment that he ran in Vancouver where he took random strangers and he asked them how happy they were. The ones that agreed to participate in an experiment were handed money as well as a note inside of an envelope. The strangers were then broken into 2 groups, and based on which note they had received, half of the note said, by 5 p.m. today, spend this money on yourself. And then they went on to list some ideas for the spending. Among them were bills, expenses, gifts for yourself. There were just different examples on there. And then the second group had a note in their envelope that said, by 5 p.m. today, spend this money on somebody else. And the examples were a charitable donation or a gift for others, or you guessed it, coffee. So the actual amount of money was random. So some received $5, others received $20. But then later that night, they called the people who received the money and they asked them what they had spent the money on and how happy they felt now. The people who spent the money on themselves spent it on earrings and makeup and, of course, coffee. But then the other group who was instructed to spend it on someone else had almost a different list entirely. Everything ranging from a teddy bear for their niece, giving it to a homeless person. The one thing that was on it, wait for it, coffee. So Starbucks was actually the only group that had reportedly made it into both groups of people, or the only company. So the interesting conclusion of the experiment, though, based on the reaction of the people who were given the money, is that people who bought other people coffee legitimately reported to be happier, while those that bought it only for themselves reported being no more happy at all. Now, what's even more relevant is the amount of money didn't make any noticeable difference. The only uptick reported in happiness had to do with whether or not they spent the money on someone else or themselves. So just think about that for a minute. The actual amount of money didn't matter. So the fact that there were variance in money actually was an important part of the experiment, because the only thing that made anybody happier was whether or not they bought coffee for somebody else. So in 2016, the Huffington Post ran a survey asking their readers, if you could say in one word what you would want more of in life, what would that be? Overwhelming majority of responses replied, they want more happiness. But turns out the answer is only about $50 a month away. So if we take into account the fact that as humans we're wired for servitude, this conclusion makes perfect sense. Nowadays we're all trying so hard to get somewhere and to be someone that we've essentially gotten lost along the way. Our drive has put us in a position where we prioritize the wrong aspects of life sometimes, and we've put far too much stock in things that don't matter. Things like social media validation, whether or not we're living up to arbitrary standards instead of our own, or the classic, whether or not we're keeping up with the Joneses. So while discussing this concept with my buddy Ryan Munsey, right after I read this study, I remember he said something that really hit me. He said, we don't know how to measure the things that we value, so we end up valuing the things that we can measure. So happiness, of course, has no substantial metrics outside of subjective thought. So we end up looking for things that tend to cause a dopamine response. This is what I was talking about yesterday. One of those things that has become prevalent in our lives as of late are likes on various social media platforms. We become addicted to the dopamine that we receive when someone likes our picture, and then we post on social media. And now what's worse is, and I know I talked about this yesterday, but what's even crazier is these companies are very aware of that. And so the algorithms are built in to ensure that you get a constant dopamine release. So when you post a picture on Instagram, you'll get a whole bunch of likes up front. That's the big dopamine response. But they also know if they can show your picture to a certain amount of people every so often throughout the rest of the day, that likes will trickle in for you. And so you'll always be coming back to look for more. Because remember what my buddy Ryan said. He said, we don't know how to measure the things that we value, so we end up valuing the things that we can measure. So we value these likes on social media. We value this validation. But the thing that makes us the most happy, the servitude part of our lives, it's so hard to measure. It's hard to get an ROI on that. And it's not ROI as in return on investment, but like a return on impact. It's hard to know. But when it comes to taking care of yourself, you have to prioritize your happiness, and that means prioritizing the needs of others. Now, the last thing I want to say when we talk about dopamine and serotonin, because I told you yesterday, serotonin is the thing that's the neurotransmitter that is related to long-term happiness. Now, the problem is that dopamine has a suppressive effect on serotonin. So our neurotic behavior is literally the only logical conclusion that could be drawn from all our pleasure-seeking behavior. Dr. Robert Lustig, he wrote a book called Hacking of the American Mind, and in it, he said, he had a quote, he said, corporate America has been selling us pleasure disguised as happiness for some time now. Think Happy Meals, Happy Hour, the smiling emojis we use to tell our friends we like what they do. And so, we're literally looking for happiness in the most selfish way possible as we unknowingly seek pleasure. The result is that not only are we actually unhappier, but we're becoming more or less connected to those around us as we bury ourselves in the computer attached to our hand. I know I talked about that yesterday. It's like you got to be careful because you don't want to trade pleasure now for a happy future. Now, the entire time we're staring at our phone and we're doing this, the person behind us in line is wondering how they're going to tell their boyfriend or their girlfriend that they're pregnant, or wondering why no one likes them, or why no one has liked their post as they incessantly refresh and stare away at their own phone. And the entire time you could have parted with an extra $2 and helped begin to turn the entire situation around, not just for them, but for you. And so my opinion, the best way to start taking care of yourself is to start changing the world, starting with coffee. All right, I love you guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow on Morning Coffee.